Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Rising Voices Water Systems Working Group session. I know that many of us had just joined a couple of different breakout groups and had some rich discussions around the different ecosystems that we in our communities are living with. I particularly was a part of the marine ecosystems discussion, and that some of that which followed the panel session that hopefully many of you were able to watch, that was pre-recorded to this session. So I'm going to go ahead and share some high-level thoughts and takeaways from our discussion in the marine ecosystems session, and then hand it off to Carletta, who will do the same for freshwater ecosystems, and followed by an invitation to complete an evaluation for this session, and then Carletta will close us out. So within our marine ecosystem conversation, there was so much that kind of came out in terms of the shared experiences around what's happening that has impacts to our community, what is changing in the ocean, and learning how all of these systems are so interconnected. So I'll go ahead and give some examples, some of the specific examples. So, we started off with temperatures rising within our oceans, and this having an effect on species that are migrating north, not only marine species, but then because of the sea ice melting, that there are plants and other animals that are migrating more north as well. This rising of temperatures in the oceans also affects the inland weather patterns. So folks like even in the southeast are experiencing even more and harsher hurricanes than they had before, as a result of what's happening within the changes in temperatures for our oceans. There is less of a return on salmon and other marine species, food species that tribes and indigenous peoples really have a close dependence on for social, cultural, and economic purposes, as well as for ceremony purposes. We have some other aspects of just maybe community or person made harms that are happening in our oceans, including sunscreen that's harming the the coral reefs in Hawaii. So that led into a discussion around how can policies shift more quickly to respond to the observations that local community members are having in relation to the marine ecosystems around them. Let's see, in the Arctic, large conversation around what's happening in the Arctic region, primarily around some of the aspects that we've discussed already, but concerns over safety on getting on ice for harvesting large marine mammals. This is a dangerous and more treacherous experience for indigenous communities. And it's also leading to more opportunities for foreign ships to be coming to land in these areas where, it's causing, I suppose, many different political and social and health aspects and concerns with regard to not only people likely bringing other diseases, but the sea ice melting and exposing potential diseases and gases that have been under ice for a very long time and causing additional harms to the area. There was a big discussion around, the resilience of indigenous communities and the aspects that indigenous peoples have that can really support being more resilient and creating solutions for some of these harms. One of the one of the things that Paulette mentioned that really stuck to me was technology can't solve everything. And that's, specific to Western technologies, right? So how can we shift that use and reliance on Western systems and technology to indigenous systems? What can our language tell us about what's happening or what has previously happened in different place-based areas that that indigenous communities might be relying on and are also experiencing impacts from climate change within the oceans. Also, what are stories and indigenous cartography? How can that help to shape our response to some of these systems? And then that led to, I think, a conversation about what are some of the things that we within Rising Voices, as well as kind of how can we call on our colleagues to take action around whose knowledge counts and whose knowledge is valued in these processes. There's an opportunity here to really shift academia and our ivory tower to make space and more space for Indigenous voices and Indigenous peoples. How can the systems everywhere from funding organizations and grants and timelines and who's hired and who's retained, how can all of this shift so that we can continue to have a growing number of Indigenous peoples and voices and knowledge being centered around how we are experiencing and responding to changes within the ocean. So I will stop there. A lot of the conversation was captured in notes that Jackie took for us and will be included within the report for this conversation. And I will hand this off to Carletta. Thank you.
Ja, also da is sonst gi ich hier qua shata tsana je de ho de se la dona shinigi torachi mishlo to hada bashishin adult la zalay da shiche do ye de na tachine da shinala akot a sanish dodle hoda da ultra de ade nashnish do shalta. Good afternoon, everyone out there. Thank you so much for joining us today on this live stream YouTube channel talking about water systems. My name is Carletta Chief. I'm an associate professor and extension specialist in environmental science. And I am Dene. And today I facilitated the breakout session for freshwater systems. And my group talked a lot about what water meant to them in their community, especially as it relates to their identity as Indigenous peoples, and how that connection to the water and the waters that they use within their communities really fuel the work that they do today. And we had representations of Indigenous participants from the Great Plains, the Southwest, and also Latin America. We also had participants coming from academia that were working with Indigenous communities in community outreach and education, as well as tribal climate change work and also water technologies. And so those participants talked about their work in terms of why they did it, why it was meaningful to work with them, Indigenous communities, mostly because of their own upbringing and their values related to water and protection of waters, and just having a different view of water that from a non-Indigenous perspective. We talked about the changes that were occurring in freshwater ecosystems, primarily related to lack of water, and how climate change was changing the availability of water, such as through local droughts and mega droughts. One of our participants talked about how the local systems, water systems, have been depleted through climate change, but also through overuse of the water, and how it has impacted water quality that was available for use by the people, and also through agricultural use. And members talked about how they remember using the water and playing in the water that was of higher quality many years ago, but because of climate change and overuse, it has changed water quality, and that's really impacted the people's lives and their livelihood. We talked a lot about drought and how it's impacted agricultural uses and importance of dryland farming, and how to find ways to respond to those changes, such as rainwater harvesting and different ways of water system capture systems. And another participant talked about water quality changes as the result of climate change, such as water quality changes, and how water treatment systems need to be redesigned to account for those water quality changes. And also we talked about learning from other international developing communities and how they've responded to these changes, such as in Uganda, where they're using pump systems that are designed for their communities, but also what are the solutions they're engaging in, and can we learn from those international models? And then we talked about how science and sovereignty can be used to respond to these changes. And a lot of times, Indigenous work in these communities are not valued in academia, like Melissa was referring to in these ivory towers, where it's not valued. We also talked a lot about that, and where scholarship with Indigenous communities on water may not be valued as cutting edge research or cutting edge technology. And so there is a desire and a need to change that paradigm in academia. And also that there's the other flip side of how it can also be tiring to talk about those challenges as an Indigenous student or an Indigenous scholar or scientist. So there's also this challenge of not being valued to do the science. And our participants talked about how it's really important to recognize that that Indigenous scientists can also do the science, but also be aware that it can be tiring to also be the spokesperson. So there's that two, yings and yangs of the two sides, where you want to be the voice and that voice should be elevated, but also that it can be a burden to be that voice all the time. So I think that's where our conversation went to, the importance of the role of rising voices to educate those in academia to understand that the value of working with Indigenous communities, and that the scholarship and outreach that is conducted around Indigenous water is important. And so rising voices can be bringing in those academic individuals to participate and be educated about the changes occurring in Indigenous water, and how we can work together in a good way that will recognize and value that work. There's a need to find more funding to respond to the challenges facing tribal communities around water. And Rising Voices is a space where we can form those connections and foster solidarity among Native people and Indigenous partners and academic partners, because these solutions need to be shared. We talked about Dr. Lupita Montoya, who is an engineering or was an engineering professor at University of Colorado Boulder in civil and architectural engineering, who worked a lot with the Navajo Nation on air pollution technologies, and she published in high impact factors, but the University of Colorado Boulder didn't appreciate her work with the Navajo Nation, and so she was denied tenure. And so she's currently in a lawsuit with UC Boulder. And so there's this lack of recognition of, and value working with Indigenous communities. And so it's Rising Voices could help with that in terms of, educating those academic partners and those who may not necessarily be partners, but just educating them that it's important to work with Indigenous communities and it should be valued and not considered cutting edge research and work. That would summarize the discussion that we had. I really want to say thank you to those who shared and participated in our breakout session.
Thank you so much, Carletta and Melissa. I'm blown away because I just that is not an easy thing to do immediately after a discussion. And huge thanks for sharing the words and wisdom from yourselves and the group and your leadership today and all days. And to Jackie and Cambria for helping to capture this conversation today, which we'll report out to you all very soon, put it together for the community. And just to, and thank you so much to Lomikai, always in good partnership on this this virtual effort we have embarked on together, and to Olohana Foundation. And all the good partners who are here with us in person and also in our hearts and in spirit. And I will be sharing in just a moment. We really, really do take your feedback very seriously. And we really appreciate all those who've been filling out the evaluation forms each time. I know, it can be arduous asking each time, but this really does help us, shape programming for now and into the future. And so really appreciate just, those few minutes that you can take, before you head off on this Friday. And if you can fill that out, I'll share the link just a moment in the YouTube, and then also send it out on the RV email list. Also a reminder to folks that we will be next month in September. That seems crazy. I think my mind's still in April. September, we'll be focusing on food systems, and we will be getting information to you on that very soon. And so hope you can continue to join us for this virtual series and find ways to continue to connect even at this distance. So hope everyone keeps well, keeps healthy. Thank you for taking this time and energy to share with us today. With that, I will, if it's okay, I'll pass it back to Carletta just for, so I am not your final word for the day. Carletta will just share a thank you, goodbye as well.
Thank you again for all of those who joined us virtually on this channel. And as I said in my language, water is life. And as I sit here next to the San Francisco Peaks, which is our, to my people, the people, the Ko'osli, it's really important for our sense of place and where we come from. It is raining here, and we've had high temperature. We've broken records in the heat. and it's rainy right now, and we've been praying for rain even within our communities. We've been hoping and praying for rain, so it's just a real blessing to have that be a way to close this out, and knowing that our prayers were answered for rain, and to break this streak of heat that's been going on in Arizona. So with that, we know that we are blessed in our connections with our Indigenous brothers and sisters and friends out there. It's been wonderful to have this conversation about water is life. And I wish to you and every one of your family and loved ones safety and health and protection, especially during this unprecedented times. I have a wonderful weekend.
Alarm bell rings, same thing every day. Bell answer the phone, I'm not home, I'm already on my way. Out the door, down the street, got to keep me on my feet. I got coffee, I got donuts, in the office down the street. And the fat half lady's faking a heart attack. And my manager yelling at me, say, can't give her money back. The bank called, the notice overdue. And that's just one more thing I gotta do. Till I get off the earth, till I get off the earth. 12 o'clock, the lunch bell rings, same thing every day. You better answer the phone in the proper tone. Yes, sir, whatever you say. Right on time, on the time, got to keep me on my feet. I got contracts, I got lawyers, in the office down the street. Bank jam is backing up, holding out can stand. Things ain't working out the way I had them planned. Bank call the meeting, just a drink or two. That's just one more thing I gotta do. Till I get off the earth, till I get off the earth, till I get off the earth, till I get off the earth. 6 o'clock, it's the happy hour, sipping on the whiskey sour. Bartender asking about a refill, and I'm wondering who's paying the bill. The ladies be heating the call,